Hey, what's up guys? Anastasia here. I have been contemplating about my life recently, as I always do. And one of the things I've realized is that it's been a whole 12 years since I've stepped my foot on the Canadian soil for the first time. Oh boy, 12 years is such a long time, and it feels like 2009 and everything that happened before that feels like part of another life. And it actually was another life. I chatted with Anna, and she recently made a video about the habits that she's acquired within just the first 2 years in Canada after she moved here from Russia. And we decided it would be a great idea for me to make a video about what the first 12 years of immigration might look like and how much can you change and how much you can accomplish in this time. As I prepped to cover this topic, I did some research on different immigration stages, and there are actually 5 different stages that all the immigrants go through after moving to a new country. It all starts with the honeymoon stage, where you're so excited and happy that you finally made that change. And now, while I think those stages are all totally valid, they didn't completely apply to my situation. So as I thought about my experience of adaptation, I decided to think about it in 3 phases. The first phase was crisis, the next one was assimilation, and then the last phase was acceleration. So as I talk about my Canadian immigration experience, I will cover those 3 phases of my life and of my journey here in Canada. So if you're interested in hearing my story, please sit back, sit comfortably, grab a cup of coffee or tea, or something a little bit stronger than that, and let's get started. So when I moved to Canada, I actually completely skipped the honeymoon phase. I was not happy, I was not thrilled that I moved to the new country. I actually went straight into the crisis mode. And here's an analogy that I like to use when I talk about this experience. Think about a tree. The tree is as old as you are. As the time passes, the tree grows taller, thicker, and the roots go deep down into the soil. Now imagine you take that tree and you rip it out of its soil and move it into another place that's new, uncomfortable, strange. How long will it take for the tree to recover from this change and start blooming again? And this is exactly what immigration feels like. We are just like trees. It takes a while for us to recover from the shock, but eventually we grow older and stronger and start blooming again. For those of you who are new to this channel, I was born and raised in Russia, in St. Petersburg, and I moved to Canada at the age of 19. My parents were the sole definition of the post-Soviet struggling middle class, and they really wanted to move to Canada in search of a better and more stable life. So when we moved, I moved straight into the crisis phase. That's because I didn't really want to move in the first place. I didn't want to leave my friends, and I was really missing them when we were here. So it took me a very long time to get over that feeling and a bunch of other feelings. And I would say, looking back now, it took about 4 years for me to fully go over that crisis mode. And this was about the right amount of time for me to rip my Russian identity out and slowly start building my new Russian-Canadian one. So the theme of these crisis phase for me was learning. Learning English, learning French because we settled in Montreal, Quebec, and learning myself. I was also trying to understand what it's like to be making friends in a different language, what it's like to laugh or have arguments with different cultures and ethnical groups. The first 4 years for me was the time when I struggled to build my new identity as the old identity slowly became irrelevant. And honestly, in all fairness, I forced for it to become irrelevant. For some reason, I was ashamed to be Russian. I was ashamed to be a new, fresh immigrant here. I didn't want anyone to know or realize that I was so fresh off the boat. I was also trying really hard to get rid of my Russian accent, just so that I wouldn't feel inferior or wouldn't feel discriminated when I'd be talking to the native speakers. And apart from that, the first few years were the toughest because I missed home and I missed my friends so greatly. During this time, I did spend some time to learn French. I took the French courses offered by the government of Quebec, where I would learn French in French, and I took a part-time job as a barista at a coffee shop. I also started volunteering as a way to socialize and make friends, and it really helped me within the first couple of months just to feel a little bit less alone and strange. I also started school eventually in design, only to drop it a couple of semesters after to realize I wanted to do something completely different in my life. And in the end, I racked up $30,000 in student debt. In my 3rd year in Canada, I had finally landed my first proper official or whatever office job in Canada, and it was as a QA tester for a video games company. That job paid just $13 an hour, but for me, that was a huge amount of money. This was also a strange time socially for me because of the barrier in my language, because I didn't have the confidence in my accent, in my language. I didn't know all the words, and I spoke quietly. I didn't have as much confidence when I spoke, and people could see that and they could sense that. And to combat that, I just started reading books, self-help books actually, about how to talk to people, how to start conversations, how to make small talk and stuff like that. At the same time, I truly appreciated hanging out at parties or at friends' places where you would hear 4 or 5 different languages being spoken in the same room. And sometimes you'd hear some people speaking sentences using words from 3 different languages in one single sentence. That was fascinating and I really enjoyed that part. This time also coincided with the process of me trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life. I already mentioned that when I was in Russia, I studied design, and when I moved here to Canada, I also continued to study design. But after just a year and a half here at Concordia University in Montreal, I've realized I wanted to do something different. So I took a break of 2 years and then eventually made a decision to switch to business technology management major and decided to start my career in product management, which I'm doing up until this day today. So this process of changing programs put a lot of pressure on me because I spent 5 years trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life and I still wasn't completely sure. And then looking back into all my friends from Russia who I started university with, they had already graduated, they were starting families already, and I was just still figuring my life out. I really felt socially behind. And the biggest point that I want to bring across is that I know that there's lots of different situations after you immigrate to Canada, and my situation was far not the worst, but at the same time, I don't want to glorify immigration. Making such a drastic change is tough and painful. It's uncertain and it's unsettling. But the subsequent adaptation and changes happen gradually. Month over month, slowly, you shave off those moments of confusion, discomfort, frustration, and the new layers of your new identity in this new country start slowly growing, and it feels a lot better with time. With every new day and experience, you slowly start to understand the new environment and the society you're in. And you don't just start to understand, you also start to appreciate the new environment and this new opportunity that you're actually creating for you right now in this specific moment. It's almost like starting a new game all over again. Lastly, I've realized that most of the insecurities and vulnerabilities that we have are mostly in our own heads. When I moved to Canada, I was constantly comparing myself to my Russian friends who weren't thousands of kilometers away from me. I compared myself to my Canadian classmates. I compared myself to my co-workers. But their journey is so much different than mine. And their starting point is so different than mine as well. We always think that the spotlight is pointing on us. And it turns out that everyone thinks that same way. Everyone is concerned with how they're doing, what they're saying, how they look. Technically, everyone is primarily concerned with themselves, so they don't care about you as much as you would expect them to. And what that means for your own life is that just keep doing what you're doing, be concerned with yourself, and don't spend your time and energy thinking about what everyone else thinks of you, just do you. So this was my crisis phase. And now let's move on to something a little bit more fun, which is the assimilation phase. And this is the time where people typically start being a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more easygoing. And in my case, this was the time where my sense of humor started to return. Although some people say that it never really existed. Anyways, I made a career switch and I started studying an absolutely new field at university. And I also started finally to crack the code of how to make friends and build relationships in Canada in this new society. With my sense of humor. I was feeling good, finally, about my social life. And you know what? Going to university was such an amazing context for that, despite the fact that I was always the oldest one in class. So the social integration part here is, I think, key to this assimilation phase. I finally started feeling at ease whenever I would be at a house party surrounded by friends. I would feel comfortable, relaxed, I'd be making jokes. I wouldn't care so much about the mistakes that I would make or the accent that I'd have, or even if I don't understand something or someone doesn't understand my accent, I just wouldn't care and I repeat myself several times. In fact, my friends would appreciate the little Russian quirks and the accent that I would have, and they wouldn't laugh at me, but they would laugh with me and have fun with all these Russian jokes that I would try to translate to English, or using some of the proverbs that no one would understand. And this is where I slowly started to realize that I should not be ashamed of my heritage. I should actually be proud of it. And with that, or despite that, what I struggled the most with was the conflict and intersection of two identities that I was battling with. On one side, I had my old Russian identity, and on the other, had this new one racing into my life like an F1 racing car. I felt like I was getting sucked into this new life of student hangouts, just hustle culture. I noticed my personality started changing. I became a little bit more confident, I spoke up, I had an opinion, and I was willing to share it. And I was just overall a lot more outgoing than I ever was. These were my roaring mid-20s. I fully embraced the work hard, play hard lifestyle. I was fierce with every single job I took. I was working like crazy. I practically quadrupled my salary in that time. I've realized that communication skills are very critical in the Canadian society, so I focused on developing those skills in the first place. I was also taking on a lot of side projects. So what would happen is that I would go to work during the day, I would study for my university classes in the evening, and then I would be doing some side projects on weekends and during the nights. And this is actually a curse among the immigrants. We work extra hard to make our immigration worthwhile. We want to make the best from the struggle and the sacrifice that we had to go through when we moved to a new country, leaving our family and friends behind, leaving motherland behind. And that's why we work so hard to create the future that we envision for ourselves and for our families. And there's a good and a bad side to working hard and that kind of hustle culture. In my case, it wasn't super sustainable. I racked up $10,000 in extra costs for my tuition fees just because I failed classes and had to retake it. And I also burnt out twice. The lesson learned from that assimilation period is that to make that change, you have to decide that you want it first. You have to be ready for change, and you have to be open to the world around you. If you're thinking about immigration, think about how open you are to changing, and how open are you to working super hard to rebuild your life from scratch, but with so much greater rewards in the future. Another lesson I learned here is that during that crisis phase, I tried so hard to get rid of my Russian identity in favor of the new Canadian one. I tried to do that just because I wanted to fit in, but that was so silly in the first place. In retrospect, our heritage and where we come from is what actually makes us so unique and special. Ultimately, the experiences that we grow up with and then the environment in which we grow up is what shapes our character and makes us strong as we are today. Nowadays, when people ask me where I'm from, I proudly say that I'm born and raised in Russia. Don't ever be ashamed of your identity. Now that the assimilation phase was over, I'm super excited to talk about my acceleration phase, and that phase really lasted for probably the last 2 or 3 years. Overall, I can definitely say that it took me a solid decade to chill out, to feel confident, to feel comfortable, and to finally start feeling like I got a hang of this country. The lifestyle I had in the assimilation phase was not sustainable nor healthy, but it was critical in building my own life here in Canada. And I also learned to focus on things that really do matter. There's one thing about my education and background that I actually didn't mention. It took me a solid 5 years to finish my bachelor's degree in business that I started back in 2014. So I actually graduated just 2 years ago, and you know what? Despite everything, it was a huge confidence booster. I was surprisingly stubborn in getting my degree, despite the fact that it would have practically made no difference for me in my career. But for some reason, I felt insecure not having a degree. It's this Russian part in me where if you don't have a degree, you're not considered a worthy member of society, because your degree and your diploma is what guarantees you your future no matter what. That is one of my many Russian sides that never went away. And you know what? I'm fine with that. I'm actually happy I went through that university experience, because this was the time where I've actually made some lifelong friendships, and I've had some of the most amazing and memorable experiences. So by the time I graduated, I had lived in Montreal for about 10 years. And interestingly, just in the summer that I graduated, I was approached by a recruiter with a job offer from Toronto, and I happily took it. So after 10 years in Montreal, I decided to move in Toronto, and I did that in just 3 weeks. Many people ask me, how is it that I could make such a decision so lightly and easily? How could I leave my 10 years behind of building a new life, building a career in Montreal, having made friends and stuff like that? Well, see, there's an interesting quality that you developed having made such a drastic change as immigration once. You actually realize how not scary in retrospect it is, and you start to understand how many amazing experiences and changes to your life it brings. Or you realize what person you become from that, and it's no longer as scary, it's actually exciting, and you start looking forward to such drastic changes again because you're curious what is it that it's going to lead you to. It's now been 2 years I've been living in Toronto, and decision to move was probably one of the best decisions that I've made ever since moving to Canada, even though that wasn't even a decision I made. And I would like to give a huge shout out to all the Canadians for recognizing the struggle of immigration and being so welcoming and warm to us. Looking back on my last 10 years in Canada, some of you might say that this experience was way too complicated or convoluted and non-sustainable, but the truth is, everyone's journey and path is unique, and I think it's important for us to embrace it. I've met so many different families of immigrants from all over the world in the last 10 years. Some of them spent 2 years in Canada and decided it wasn't for them, so they moved back and they live very happily back in their country and don't ever want to move back. And on the flip side, I've met some families with 2 or 3 kids who would move here and assimilate and adapt so quickly that within the first year they would be running their own business and be super happy living their Canadian life. These are the people that I wish I could learn from. You could probably look at me and say, she's trying way too hard. And the reality is that I was. But it was my personal journey, and I've learned a handful from that, and that's what led me to the life that I have today. And I can confidently say that I have a pretty happy and a comfortable life. I am happy in the city that I live in. I have a good job. I have a stable financial situation. I get to travel every now and then. And I have a loving friends and family and an amazing partner that I can lean on. If you're watching this video because you're contemplating about moving to a new country, then here's my message to you. The scariest part is always leading up to the decision that you need to make. And once you've made that decision and stepped over that boundary, your new reality begins. And that new reality, in reality, isn't actually any much scarier than tomorrow. If you're itching for a change, think deeply about why you really want to change and what change are you looking for. Some of the most successful and happiest immigrants had a clear plan of what they were expecting from this country. Was it stability? Was it a better future for your kids? Was it a financial success? Think about what reasons are yours for moving to a new country. And no matter what reasons those are, they're valid. All reasons are valid if they're valid for you. Planning also makes things a little bit less scary because it gives you a sense of control. Before you move, do your thorough research. What are cities like in Canada? What's the society like? What are jobs like? And what's the job market for your specific profession is? What's Canadian mindset and culture? What are some of the challenges or things that people get frustrated by in Canada? All these things will help you minimize the culture shock and just set the expectations as accurately as you can. Don't look back and don't get affected by what other people are saying to you. People typically project their own insecurities onto you. So if they say you cannot make it, it's because they think they cannot make it. So brush all those comments off, stay true to your plan and to your goals, and just keep going full on. And that's it for today, guys. I hope this video was helpful for you and every single one of you was able to pick up something valuable from my story. Immigration process is not easy, but it's very rewarding if you really know what you want to do and you stick to your plan. And one thing I'd like to highlight is that do not be afraid to reach out to your local communities. People who end up living in a different country, they like to stay tight together and they're super happy to help to each other. So don't be shy, reach out. And if you have any questions or if you want to chat or have some questions about what immigration feels like, send us an email, leave a comment below, or follow us on Instagram. We'll be super happy to chat and help any way we can. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to our channel so that we can continue sharing some of the interesting experiences that we'll live through as we try to rebuild our life in Canada. Anne has just been here for about 2 years trying to share some interesting things. So stay tuned, and that's it for me. Please stay safe and take care of yourself. Bye, friends.